welcome to another Made by Folk live stream, everybody. Sorry for the slight delay. As usual, these technical things never work out just the way you imagine. So we were trying to get our screen share to work, and we figured out a plan B. I think it's still going to work really well, and it is well worth the wait. Because today we're talking to Tom Muller of HelloMuller, and he's put together a really great little presentation on a recent project that he's been working on over the past. I'll have to actually ask him how long he's been working on this project, but the rebrand of the X-Men, the X-Men series, it's a whole big identity system based on this original design. And I'm really excited to see and hear a lot more about the process behind this project. So let's get Tom on and make sure that now everything is finally working. Hello, Tom. Welcome to Made by Folk.
Hi, everything is going to fail again. I'm sure of it. It has to. It's the way these things go.
Come on,
Hi, good
positive
evening,
thinking.
good morning, good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you're dialing in and watching this stream. Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Dude, Tom, thanks for taking the time, man. I mean, I'm a massive fan of your work for so many years. You know this. And I remember when I first saw the X-Men project, I was so excited. As a fan of the series as well, I thought it's just like a great move forward, a much more modern version of where they were beforehand. So I'm really excited about seeing all these little details that you've prepared for us today. But yeah, let's warm up a little bit after that slightly stressful setup. And I'm also really happy to finally see like the opposite. On Instagram, I always see the view that you're seeing of your studio, like the great
Yeah,
wall that's behind us at this stage. But it's nice to really see like all your work in the background and your bookshelf as well. You're
yeah, yeah,
talking
yeah.
from your home, or do you have a separate studio?
Yes. No, this is our home studio. I think after this segment, when we go to the Instagram live chat, I can kind of walk around and show some bits and pieces and show the view that I always. That's kind of like my thing. I try to post the same photo once a month, and then just to see what the intake is and like if people like spot small differences and everything. But yeah, no, we've been in this house for the last 10, 11 years now. So this whole space has kind of grown with us, kind of changed and kind of expanded when I get too much stuff in here.
So do you intentionally like place new objects just to kind of throw people off, or is it quite a natural progression that you've been changing
I think
over time?
it's more of a natural progression. I think it's also nice for me to kind of like scroll back and kind of go like, oh, my studio looked like shit 5 years ago. To like, it's always like every time like get happier and more comfortable and like it's never the right space, but it always gets better.
I like how like I try and do like just a small arrangement behind me because most of the time people
Yeah,
just see this, and on that side is literally nothing. So it's like super
yeah,
boring.
yeah, yeah.
I need to take a leaf out of your book and make the thing that I'm looking at much more exciting. That's gonna
It
be
was
my
the
next
same. It
project.
was the same for the longest time. That wall behind me was just nothing until last year when all of a sudden everything happened on Zoom calls, and it
Of
was like,
course.
yeah, maybe do something else with the space because that's not what people see. People always see my view here is like beautiful, and it has
Yeah.
been, you know, because I
Inspiring.
see this every day. Yeah, yeah, it's inspiring, but like that view was like, okay, I need to do something. And also I run out of storage space, so we had to like put in new like shelves.
Well, another teaser for later on is, Tom, you'd already said you'll hopefully take us through a couple of those items on those shelves later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So if you are watching this live right now, definitely head over with us to Instagram Live afterwards where we'll do an AMA and you can ask all the questions that you like. But for now, we're going to try and go through this presentation. So I'm going to be driving this ship. So you have to apologize if I might, miss the beat here or there, and please apologize I'll apologize for Tom already for maybe having to say next slide, please.
You will be
But
you will be a fantastic remote.
I will do my best to edit this properly. All right, let's first of all make sure I have everything. All right, let me get my audio on. your audio on, otherwise nobody will be able to hear you. There's no point in that.
Mhm.
Let's turn system audio off. All right. I think we're
Good thing I
good.
actually thought about sending you a PDF of the
I
deck.
know. I would have asked, but you were well prepared, so I didn't even have to bother. So yes, hopefully this is the same
It's not my
version.
first presentation technical failure.
All right. I'll hand it over to you, Tom, and I'll try and keep on track.
I need to see your screen, don't I?
Oh, yeah, of course. You can't see mine. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'll
Can
share
people see
mine.
your screen?
This is gonna. So I'm sharing it to the world. I'm just not sharing it to you
Ah,
yet. So this is gonna be the next interesting challenge for my Mac to actually not absolutely collapse under the weight of. Wait, I'll just share the stream. Here we go. Let's try this. Start sharing that. Okay. How is that? Can you see anything yet?
ooh, yes, I see myself
In a
in a
little
small
bubble.
window. Yeah, is that gonna be lagging everything now? Am
It
I on a
might.
lag?
You're a little laggy, but not too much, and then the stream's delayed anyway.
Yeah, okay, cool. I look like an animated GIF, which is also very fun. So let's get into this then. I've got how many 60-ish slides? We're gonna try and blast through this in 15 to 20 minutes, and then we can go over to Instagram, which will hopefully be a lot smoother
I'm sure it will. Instagram has that
than
down.
Skype. Thank you, Skype, for being so fluent and smooth. Right. So, hello everyone. That's me. That's my logo. Next slide, please. And we are today going to talk about. You can just skip forward to I think slide 3.
All right.
Now there's a lag, so I think that I'm seeing a video lag, or what's happening?
I mean, currently I'm showing rebranding a pop culture icon for the 21st century.
Cool. So that's basically I'm still seeing
Oh no!
the title screen. All right. I guess I think what we can do. So you're on the right screen. So I'm
Okay.
just gonna you can stop screen sharing for me.
Okay.
I'm just going to present to myself basically, and
Yes. Oh no. I think we've lost Tom. Oof. This is rough. So, folks, let me just take a moment here. So far, this has always gone pretty smooth. And I do always say every single stream has its issues, but this has definitely been the most tricky so far. So let me just get Tom back, and then we'll just try this one more time. Because I think Skype just literally crashed on me. So let's quit that and try it again. All right. You guys just have to bear with me and listen to me for a few seconds. All right. So Skype's back up and running. And let's hope he's not presenting to himself now. Yes. I know. I definitely want to try Discord next as well. And this is all pretty much an experiment. So far, as I said, I mean, this is like the 10th stream or so that we've done. And it's worked reasonably smooth. I mean, at least screen sharing has always worked, but today it just did not wanna. So what we'll try and do is get Tom back now and hopefully then take it from there. But yeah, when you rely on technology, it's an absolute pain. But what you guys could already do, if you haven't already, then you can have a look at, make sure that you're already following us on Instagram for later on. It's at Made by Folk. We'll head over there if this all works out at some point, and then we'll try and do a live stream on there. Although at this rate, I fear that we might just have to go right there because nothing is working at the moment. Of course, Skype had to do an update as I restarted. So hopefully now it'll work. Otherwise, I'm going to really have to think on my feet here. Okay. I literally have to sign into everything again. You are kidding me. Alright. Talk amongst yourselves. I literally do a tech setup every single time so that I can try everything first and then not have to worry about this during my call. But now everything is going wrong. And I can't remember my Skype login. You literally couldn't make this shit up. Okay, let's try this. Jesus. Well, at least some entertainment is hopefully watching me sweat profusely just to get Skype up and running again, but it ain't happening. Folks, I'm really sorry. I can't actually get... Oh no! How am I gonna do this? I really am at a loss as to how I'm gonna make this happen quickly. I think I'm literally going to have to... I'm gonna have to try and just keep going and hopefully get Tom back somehow. But you guys are just gonna have to wait for me. Which is no fun, I am sure. Alright, come on. Let's try this one more time. Skype, there we are, copy. Okay, password. Oh, it's looking good. It's looking good, folks. 20 minutes in, and I think we might have cracked it. Okay, Skype's running. That's a start. Let's get Tom back on here. He's probably left. All right. Let's try this. It's ringing. That's something I thought. Here he is. We're back. I had to restart Skype, and then Skype decided to reinstall an update and then signed me out. So it took me like 10 minutes to get back here. Jesus. All right. But I think it wasn't you. This was me. So we after this is over, I can see it now. I was just focusing on getting this up and running. Okay, anyway, let's try. That's okay. Well, I think your suggestion of, getting you to just sort of skip through your slides, and I'll try and do the same so everybody can see your slides. So we're definitely going to be over time now. Totally my fault. Everybody, thank you for being so patient.
I can do this very fast.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll get the slides back up and running. Okay. Cool. So
you can basically just start at slide number 2 and then just go into slide number 3.
Okay. We've got it. Rebranding a pop culture icon for the 21st century.
Right. Yes. So
we're back in action.
That's the name of this virtual talk experience. So yeah, this is let's go. We can do this in less time than we have planned. I've done this presentation many times over, so it should be good.
Let's
Um,
go.
so this is about what Glenn kind of like set up very loftily in the introduction about the rebrand of the X-Men franchise for Marvel Comics that basically started in, or my involvement with it started in 2019 and is still running like a unstoppable speed train to this day. So if we go to the next slide and then the next slide, why the rebrand? So X-Men have been around since 1963 and has been this kind of cultural juggernaut in the world of American pop culture, comic book culture, and entertainment, and has kind of become very fast over the last few, I think we're almost at 6 decades now, has become this kind of cornerstone of the Marvel universe in the comic book world. And of course, in cartoons, movies, toys, merchandise, whatever whatever you want to call it, it's it's all over the world in every kind of medium that you can imagine. But it all kind of started with a single comic book series that then got relaunched and kind of updated over the decades. So if you go to the next slide, you kind of see how that kind of, visualized itself over like let's just call it the last 60 years or so. And what happens with these long running stories and franchises is that, every couple of months, every couple of years, the publisher wants to kind of keep the interest going, keep the fan engagement going, keep the stories going, because these are kind of you can kind of compare them with like long-running soap operas, but with superpowers. And so whenever a creative team comes in and whenever storyline changes, that kind of gets reflected in the kind of like what you call the trade dress, the cover designing, the logos and the branding. But the X-Men logo, the one like especially the cover in the top left, has kind of become the most recognizable X-Men logo that was designed by a comic book artist called Jim Steranko in the mid to late 60s, when he kind of took over sorry, what am I saying? I was Neil Adams that took over, but Jim Steranko designed the logo, if I'm not mistaken. And that has become kind of like the benchmark of every X-Men logo ever since. And even with different kind of like updates and kind of, changes in storylines, that aesthetic always kind of stayed put, like small tweaks, small updates, but nothing really ever changed. And that all kind of, came to a head in the next slide when in 2019, Disney, who had long since bought Marvel and had Marvel Studios under its umbrella, bought 20th Century Fox. So what that meant for, the non-comic comic book fans that are listening and kind of watching is that basically 25 years ago, between 25 20 years ago, Marvel Comics went bankrupt, had to sell a lot of licenses to third parties to kind of get financially back on track. One of those licenses they sold was the full X-Men franchise to 20th Century Fox. And then we got like all the X-Men movies, the Wolverine movies, Deadpool, etc., etc. That meant that whatever Marvel did in the comics could be exploited by 20th Century Fox, but Marvel couldn't really get any financial benefit from that. So for the last 20 years or so, the whole kind of X-Men franchise, while still going, they didn't really put any kind of really massive effort into completely re-energizing and redesigning, relaunching the franchise. Now, suddenly, all the toys are back in the same box. And it was the perfect moment, really, for Marvel and the creatives, writers, artists, creators that work with Marvel to kind of go, okay, hang on a second, maybe now is a good time to really do something innovative and something new, because now we have all the toys again. And that meant on the next slide in 2019, Marvel decided to cancel all their X-Men books.
Wow.
Hard stop. clearance, it was basically over and done. What the fans at that moment didn't know was that behind the scenes, a lot of things were moving, and Jonathan Hickman, the kind of like, he's called and credited in the current X-Men books as the head of X. Jonathan is an amazing creator, writer, artist, designer who came up with a plan and a kind of like a story concept to revitalize the X-Men franchise. And that meant to really have that impact was to say, let's cancel everything and restart. Not do a kind of, here's a new storyline, kind of tweak the logo and keep everything running, because that wouldn't have had the same kind of impact creatively and for the fans, rather than like, just keep going. So the next slide, can't remember what I said here. So this is kind of like designing with modernity in mind. So this is where I kind of start to come into the picture. And on the next slide, you see what are kind of like a snapshot of the most iconic X-Men logos from the last few decades, especially that X-Men roundel on the right has always been kind of translated across everything. You see it on their costumes, on toys, merchandise. It is the kind of like the X symbol. And so when I was brought on board, the first task literally was, we need a big X. But the X, needed to kind of, you've got 60 years of heritage and history to play with. So you can't really just wipe everything off the board and start anew, because you kind of like, even though it's a renewal and a relaunch, you have to kind of have that evolution. So the next slides, we go from that, how do you modernize something that's already extremely minimal and kind of timeless? Then go to the next slide, and that's by kind of looking at it and trying to kind of examine what the kind of like what the X-Men, like the franchise, the stories, the characters, what that stands for. I also got at that point the whole storyline, like the story Bible, like kind of like a grand overview of the next 3 years, where like everything would go, and that kind of inspired me as well to kind of look at things slightly differently. And so that X, rather than just be a blunt X in a keyline circle, became an abstraction of, two sides, almost two arrows bumping into each other, like two elements clashing, two like mutants and humans and mutant genomes and DNA strands, kind of like, you can almost look at it as a helix cut and locked into a circle, kind of playing with the whole kind of mutant DNA, mutant genes, and that kind of stuff. And then on the next slide, that became kind of like the benchmark. That was the foundation stone of that whole rebrand. So that X symbol and how that would be rendered and being used became the launchpad, basically, as part of that whole of the whole X-Men refresh. So on the next slides, we see how that eventually is basically presented to the world. The idea was, after all the titles were canceled, rather than just flood the market with a bunch of new X-Men titles, the idea was to tell one single story split across 2 books. So the next slide, that became House of X and Powers of 10. Two books that tell the same story from different angles. And that was basically the kind of like the foundational reintroduction of the X-Men into, like, the Marvel universe, to the audience, to the fans, to the press, to the world, basically. And on the next slide, you see like those were all the covers for those 2 miniseries. So they ran for 6 issues each, and introducing the kind of like the new brand language through those like very, very simple, very clean kind of cover devices, basically just an X stuck on the cover. You can't miss it. It's like, even on a small size, you can read it, exactly what you're kind of going to get. And we started to like subtly drop hints of how this new brand would work. And ideas about like, color use and kind of color theory and how we basically build a design system. So each series has its own kind of reverted color scheme of the other. So every month or every week, because it actually ran over the summer in 2019, it was a very fast rollout. Every other week, you get an issue of the other series, but each issue kind of connects and follows up. So they each carry the same color scheme, but inverted. So just small details to kind of make it clear to fans, like, how the signaling and how the color coding works in like how to sell these issues, basically.
That's great.
Now, the next slide is actually one of the biggest innovations that we did for the series, and kind of what we for kind of like, I think, mainstream comics in general, is to really explore the use of graphic design in mainstream comic books. And this was an idea from Jonathan, who decided that in order to give fans and readers something extra, rather than give them more pages of comic book art, introduce extra prose content, which eventually we started to call data pages, because it's kind of what they are. And they basically act as buffers and kind of chapter breakers in the story. So as you're kind of like, reading the comic, and every few pages, there will be almost like a hard stop, and you get to, as a reader, you kind of have to take a pause and ingest this extra content. It's all kind of like content that enriches the story, that enriches the reading experience. And so the next two slides are examples of how these pages ended up looking. So Jonathan and I went back and forth quite a lot, kind of really fine-tuning these pages, because we were designing back then. So I think both series started in the summer of 2019, but we basically started working like in late February that year on like, the run up and preparing the main logos and the brands. And we didn't know at that point, or at least I didn't know. And I think, with these things, like when you're telling stories, things tend to change and evolve over time. We had to create a design system that was really clean, really simple, and very modular, because we can't design all these pages week after week after week. It's just too much work. So Marvel has, luckily, a very talented team of production designers and kind of like art workers and in-house creatives who take that system and kind of run with it and drop in the contents and drop in the stories and kind of like stretch and build and populate these pages. So we had to make sure that we had like a really modern and complete system. So you can go to the next slide. It's just kind of like, another example. You see like some hints of those, like Jonathan created that whole fictional language of Krakoan, which is the new language that mutants speak on the island that they're now living. Don't want to give away too many spoilers, but I think most people have already, like, they're familiar with it. But it was like a very much a team effort in kind of like building that design system. And then the next slide is kind of like, we had 12 weeks in the summer, and it was basically, here's your new X-Men. Everything that was what was the plan for resetting the clock and kind of restarting the franchise was encapsulated in those 12 weeks. In terms of art, in terms of character. It was very kind of like high octane, like very rapid, because I mean, obviously with these things you've got like a massive lead time, especially for the artists and the color artists and everything. But it is, fast paced. Every week is like, boom, here's a new issue. Come on, keep at it, keep with us. But basically after those 12 weeks, you've got like, a brand new status quo and a kind of like a really aggressive kind of push into the market, as like basically Marvel saying, the X-Men are back and they're different. kind of like what was the old slogan, like the classic tagline, like, when the X-Men first really relaunched at the end of the 70s, which became the X-Men that everyone knows and loves. It's like the kind of all new, all different X-Men is kind of what we did again. And then the next slides, the idea basically was, once we've got these two foundational series done, the plan is to then start building the franchise again and start releasing titles. But as you can see, over the past decades, the Marvel kind of like the X-Men family got quite big, and over many years, the design of each individual title kind of like, you try to get everything kind of aligned and recognizable as a family or as a group of titles. But over time, these things start to kind of deviate and branch off, and you get like very conflicting and contrasting title designs and logos. And it kind of, when we started looking at, okay, we've got the foundation done, now we need to look at the new titles. What do we do? My idea was, let's keep everything, we made a quite a big statement with these two series. It's like, this is new, this is a brand new look and feel. We need to kind of keep this going. So the next slide, the idea I had, something I was very strongly convinced about, is like everything needs to come from the same source. So I took that X and the kind of like the form factor of that X, and on the next slide, build out a typeface specifically to then allow me to design all the different logos for all the different books that would, keep rolling out. I mean, we've just announced, I think, the last 2 months, new books and new events, but everything is basically built out of that X logo and that kind of like, that display typeface. And then the whole language around the X-Men, all the data pages and everything is kind of set in, we've got a type family. We use Helvetica Now and Helvetica Monospaced. Everything is kind of clean, timeless, very utilitarian. I think that was quite important as well, to kind of do something that's very not comics, or something that's not very kind of expected of the comic book language. And then the next slide, one of the things that I had to do, this is something like, it wasn't part of any specific brief, but it was, okay, I need to design a lot of different glyphs, because I don't want, even though I want every logo to be part of the same family, I don't want every logo to look the same. So you kind of start to create variations of individual letters. When you have titles that don't have the X in it, in the name, kind of come up with devices where you can kind of incorporate that X into the kind of like the graphic. And then the next two slides, you see how that kind of eventually, comes to life in the logo designs. Each logo has its kind of like its own unique character and kind of like idiosyncrasies and textures, but they are all unmistakably part of the same family and the same kind of, the same source. So if you go to, I think we're on slide 27 now, this is what it would look like in stores. So what I would do is like create all these logos, create kind of like a isolated key treatment of like, this is how the colors should work. This is, this one has an outline stroke. This is kind of extruded. And then that goes into Marvel, and then the creative team, the design team, the production team, they put everything together. They place the colors, they place the logos on the art. So even though every, like, if you look at this slide, every kind of comic looks vastly different, it's still very recognizable of the X-Men brand. Definitely. And it's still very much the same. So if we go to the next slide, part of that relaunch for me was very fun, because what's usually done in comics is big series get launched, you get variant covers. It's basically a tool for publishers to drive sales. Why buy one issue once if you can buy the same issue twice, but with collectible covers? So I did a series. So the next, you can kind of like click through the next 3 slides. I did a set of quote unquote design variants, which are basically shops would order these, and I think they get sold, or they can order them in percentages. So basically, for every 10 copies of, say, X-Men 1, they get one copy of one of my covers. So it's a kind of like, it drives, because comic books are still very much a collectible market, and a kind of like a collector's hobby. So it's kind of like, it's a nice way to kind of put my stamp on these relaunches and kind of play really really push the whole idea I had about, like, mutant DNA sequencing and kind of graphic textures. And so the idea behind these covers was each cover is kind of like the DNA of the team, which is like just graphic patterns and kind of then using that idea of data pages. And rather than have a more traditional comic book cover, it becomes like a data feed on
This
the
is the
front of
first
the
time that
cover.
I'm seeing these. These are incredible, man. I'm
Oh,
loving them.
thank you. Really, I've been posting them for
I've missed.
months.
I mean, dude, I see most of your work on Instagram, but these I have definitely missed. I saw a couple of teasers that looked similar to sometimes
Yeah,
that you
yeah, yeah.
shared during the week. They're great.
Um, so we're slide 30. So slide 31, the holistic design approach. So we go to slide 32 now. I'm looking, we're at like 23 minutes. We're
Don't
almost
worry.
done. I
Keep
promise.
going.
We're,
I will take full responsibility for
we're
being extra
boosting.
long
We're
today.
boosting.
Plus, it's awesome.
So
So
it's good. It's entertainment. It's, it's
totally.
evening, morning, midday. It's good. Um, so, you get one thing for, like, the people that are watching who aren't monthly, weekly comic book buyers, is that single issue comics have a very short lifespan. They get released, they go in stores, the next week the racks get replenished with the next wave of titles. And a single issue usually stays on sale for like a month, then the next one comes in, the next one comes in, etc. Then they get collected, and that's where the kind of like the long view is for publishers, because these collections, these books, they end up everywhere, not just in comic book shops, but you got your Borders, your Amazons, your WH Smiths, your what do you have in Germany?
Oof, that is a very
Chain
good question. I
bookstores.
don't even
There's
know
I
any
remember,
chain stores anymore. Sorry, man.
but
It's been a while. I just used to
anyway,
have proper
but
old
it's
comic book shops.
but it's like, that's kind of like the long game, because these, like, comics will kind of, the single issues will kind of disappear into specialty shops, into, like, the back issue market, secondhand markets, for collectors, conventions, etc. But it's these books, the collections, that will stay basically forever. So the idea was, how do we then collect all these various titles and come up with a design system and a design language and a package language, that can grow and that can stretch over the years, for, like, the kind of like the relaunch that's going on. So when we've got, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but we've basically landed on three pillars of kind of like designs coming from the same root. We've got designs for special editions and kind of like oversized hardcover books. We have designs for what is called the Dawn of X way of collecting comics, and then you've got collections that collect just individual series. So what we're looking at here is like a mock-up of the hardcover collections. So these are quite thick. I can show them later when we jump on to Instagram.
Yeah.
But these are like very big, oversized, deluxe dust jacket books, where we can kind of play with Pantone colors and kind of special links and do something fun.
Nice.
These are like, the deluxe version of these collections, but it's kind of like taking that X-Men data page design language and extrapolating that into a new format. So the next slides, you see a few examples of how that would look in like, on the interiors. And the thing is with these collections is basically, almost very simplistically said, it's almost like you take an individual comic, you tear off the covers, you've got the insides, you do that for like 12 issues, you stick them together, you put them in a hardbound book, and that's it. Where the extra value comes in is then like designing new chapter pages, new credit pages, like all the wrapping that goes around the story. And that wrapping all builds from that same like X design language. Then on the next slide, you've got the Dawn of X range. And currently, I think we capped the Dawn of X collections at 16 volumes. That has now evolved into Reign of X, kind of like the next story cycle in the relaunch. And so what this Dawn of X collection does, if you can go to the next slide, is basically collect all the X-Men series chronologically. So if you basically just want to follow everything in chronological order, you can just pick up these collections. And so volume 1 has all the number 1s of all the books, volume 2, number 2s, 3s, etc. And so it basically starts to build. And so over 16 volumes, you basically have, I think, a year, almost 2 years worth of unbroken X-Men storytelling in a kind of like a very unified and very kind of striking minimal package. Because the idea here was like, this is X, this is everything X-Men. So the whole design language is like focused on that X again, and then kind of use that form factor as kind of like, design a window to kind of like place the art, have like a really fat kind of X basically running across the cover that can then gets used to kind of bring in all the data, and it kind of like, the back copy and the back cover copy basically. Then on the next slides, you see how that language, you just saw how that looked in the hardcover. Then in the Dawn of X collections, it's the similar design language, but slightly different, just a little bit updated to kind of fit the format. And again, these books need new chapter pages, new kind of like credit pages. So that all is part of that, that unified X design language is basically just being stretched. And I'm just kind of like keep building and kind of extending. But what we kind of start ending up with is like a whole toolkit of different graphic elements that you can kind of like just repurpose and remix for different purposes. Yeah. So the next slide, we then show how that would look for the individual books and the individual series, because it's about giving readers and fans as many possibilities and as many different options in how they want to collect and how they want to read their comics, because not everyone is interested in all the titles. Some people just want to follow a single title and those single collections. So if you go to the next slide, you see how that then, that design language slightly remixed, slightly tweaked, but still very, very much part of the same family. And here we we start introducing color codes. So each title has its color. So all the X-Men collections are red, New Mutants yellow, etc., etc. And that kind of wedge is basically like a leg of the X, but kind of like, twisted and turned. And then if you go to the next slide, you see again those kind of title pages and chapter pages, all still kind of very familiar, but slightly different, slightly just customized for each book. So what you end up with on the next slide, I think slide 40 now, is you've got a very a cohesive design language across all three pillars. And immediately, no matter which kind of book, which kind of series of format that you want to buy, it's immediately like, okay, that's X-Men. That's part of like the X-Men family.
Yeah, and it fits so well together. It's incredible how it does feel all very familiar. It was a great word to use.
Yeah, that was kind of in the back of my head. I was constantly kind of thinking back of, because I've been reading X-Men since I was 7, 8 years old. 40 years. Huh. And it's so in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking like of all the books that I've been reading all my life is like, it would be nice to just have like a uniformity and kind of like a recognizable pattern across all these books. And then the designer in me is kind of going like, why not everything needs to look like a comic book? Why not inject kind of quote unquote modern graphic design? And like the stuff that we see like every day on like, design blogs on Twitter and like everything else. And it's kind of like me going, I want to see that more in comics. So that's
Yeah.
me basically just pulling all the stuff that I like and that I usually do and push it into a different medium. And I think that gives a lot of interesting results in the
Yeah,
end.
what an incredible opportunity.
Yeah. Next slides, I think slide 41.
Yep, 41.
Yeah. So what that basically does, and then these next slides are just kind of like a quick kind of like cherry picking thing, but is basically this kind of shows how that whole system works, basically very randomly, but all very recognizable. A lot of these things that you see on this screen weren't necessarily designed by me, but it's kind of like Marvel putting together like promotional art, like Instagram posts, checklists for people to like, we've got a big event coming out, like 10 of Swords. Here's all the titles that you need to read. And, you find that in comic shops and like online and all these things. But it's all basically using the system and the language that we've developed. And what that actually started to do was make all the X-Men books look very different from all the other books that Marvel is doing. So, all the Spider-Man titles, like the Avengers, they all have their thing going. So it got like all these pods within Marvel, and they all touch and connect at various points. But design-wise and kind of visually, all the X-Men books started to look suddenly really different from everything else that Marvel was doing, which is the intent, of course, because you want to want to stand out on the shelves, but you also kind of want to stand out from your brothers and sisters and kind of be like, yeah, look, we're doing something cool. And then we look very different from the other guys. Then slide 42 and 43 is just kind of showing how I keep stretching and kind of evolving that design language. This was done for a big kind of crossover event called 10 of Swords, which ran, I think, I'm just trying to think, because COVID kind of messed up a lot of like publication schedules for like loads of publishers. But I think this kind of came out this start of this year, end of last year, start of this year. But it's basically like, just using that kind of visual language and showing how that design system can stretch and just you can keep building new things with it. So yeah, slide 43, just showing how that then was used on monthly issues, how that was then adapted by Marvel's in-house team to kind of basically created a system where the event branding would take over from the individual series. So the individual logos would be pushed to the bottom of the cover, very unusual, especially for mainstream comics, with just like the event brand running on the top. So I think
impact.
slide 44, the impact. Slide 45, text. This is the kind of like the business slides.
I like it.
It should be like a pie chart, like in a line graph. But just this, I think I actually created this slide for like a completely different presentation. I think this was for I think I put this in when I was doing a kind of like a job interview or something, and just kind of showing, yes, the impact and the return on investment and blah blah blah. So this is basically how what the impact was of the series and kind of like the relaunch financially. And I grabbed these numbers from like there's various sites that kind of index sales and kind of like those kind of things. So it was really interesting to kind of see, and obviously design is a small part and it's not the thing that makes these comics a success, but it's nice to see how that kind of spawned how design was basically a big part of that relaunch. So slide 46, the relaunch was received incredibly well. The next slide, for me, the cool thing, this is for me like some of the cool personal gratification bits.
Right.
The real cool thing was that actually like the new visual language and the rebrand is canon now, so to speak. It's part of like part of the stories, part of the comics. And if you go to slide 48, and is basically really entrenched now in the stories and in the comics, and like, artists on new series are actually using the language and the design language of the X and their kind of rebrand to design sub logos and brands for individual teams, and kind of use the graphics on like uniforms and clothing, which is, that's for me is really cool. And it's kind of really, it's kind of a sign that it connects and that people think it's interesting enough to actually embed it into their own kind of creative work.
Yeah.
And slide 49 for me was very unexpected in a way, that the design part of the relaunch was really grabbed on by the press. Usually in comics, they go like, okay, here's a new, we're relaunching, there's a new event happening, there's, new movie coming out. No one really talks about, have you checked the logo? Have you checked these very nice designs? But in this case, like, people actually started to take notice of the redesign and the rebrand. And then the next slide, that rebrand has basically kind of just bloomed outside of comics. So now you've got like, you've got clothing, toys. I've done merchandise with Mondo, like slip mats, pins. The next slide, if you now Google X-Men logo, it's the first result that you see,
Yes.
which is like, this is fun, this is cool. And it's kind of like on the next slide, it's been taken over by like international publishers as well, because comics get licensed and published and translated all over the world, and it's really cool to see how individual like local publishers and their designers take that language and kind of, it's like they do their own like remixes, but it's all still like, you can see like everything clicks. It's like the puzzle works. Then the next slide, the really cool thing is like, fans have really embraced it as well. So people do bootleg t-shirts, they create their own kind of like graphics, stores, and readers like post regularly like on social media about the like, the books they're collecting and everything. But the coolest thing, this is the next slide, is that, and this is really humbling as well. It's like, it's people actually like, really like fans deciding that, yes, this is something that I want to wear forever. That's really humbling. And for me, it's all like, I always go like, oh shit, I hope I did a good design, because it's like, I know this is permanent, and I'm kind of like, I'm very thankful, and it's incredibly, it's surreal whenever I get a message or a tweet from someone and going like, look, I've got new ink. And yeah, it's amazing.
So cool how the guy on the bottom left has the old X next to the new one. So I mean, even if it gets changed in another 30 years or so, then he can just add a third version next to it. So he'll be fine.
It's like, comics are very cyclical, so it is bound to happen at some point. But
yeah,
it's that kind of like, for fans, it's kind of like, it's part of me. I've been an X-Men fan all my life. This needs to go on my body. So if anyone is watching who has an X-Men tattoo, thank you. You're amazing. Yes, from my private collection. And then slide 55, like what the future holds. So then slide 56. This is just the stuff that I've been working on now. So there's basically no letdown on the kind of like on the rollout and the kind of like the evolution of the X-Men franchise. So we launched with House of X and Powers of 10, which laid the foundation for what they call like the Dawn of X story cycle, which then concluded. Now we're in the so-called Reign of X story cycle, which I don't know how long that's going to run. But those are like very sizable kind of like chapters in the ongoing saga, which means new books keep coming out, new series need new logos, events need branding, etc., etc. And that's basically it. So slide 57. We did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go. Oh, let's
Amazing.
let's let's go to the soothing working technology of Instagram. I say this, but you
No,
never
now
know.
now that we're trying our luck, aren't we? We're gonna probably struggle on Instagram as well. Anyway, first of all, I mean, big round of applause, and thank you very much for being so patient with me on the technology here. That was a major slog. I am literally drenched in sweat from from stressing out about it.
So exciting.
But that, dude, that was so great. What I'll do is I'll just take the live stream off later on, chop out that big long piece where I didn't know what I was doing, and then it'll look great, and as if we knew what we were doing.
Oh yeah.
Tom, dude, that was great, man. Thanks very much for putting that all together and running us through it. What an amazing project, and what a incredible system that you've built. Like, so much flexibility to allow other individuals to remix it and still feel part of a big family. Such a big challenge, and we'll go into lots of questions I have, depending on how much time you can spare me, because obviously you've already given me an hour. So,
All the time.
legend. So everybody watching, thank you for your patience as well. Head over, well, like, first of all, if you want to find out more about Tom's work and this is new to you, head over to hellomuller.com. Check out his portfolio there. Make sure you follow him on all the social media channels as well. I think you're at Hello Muller on most platforms, if I remember
Yep, just
correctly.
Google Hello Muller and you'll bump into me online somewhere.
Nice one. And what we're going to do now is finish up here on YouTube, head over to Instagram Live and do a quick AMA over there so you can ask Tom lots of questions. We'll try and do like maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, depending on how much time you have. And I've got
I've
lots of
got
questions as well.
however much time. I think, yeah, it's like whenever Instagram stops the feed.
Nice one. Thanks very much. Tom, first of
Cool.
all, thank you. And I will see you on the
I'll
other
see
side.
you in a few seconds.
All right. Bye, everybody.